If you missed last week, we're going on a verse-by-verse look through the life of an amazing man named Daniel. Now, for some context, if you missed last week, Daniel lived about 600 years before Jesus, some 3,400 years after the creation of the world. And Daniel lives this life that is completely turned upside down because one night he goes to bed, and the next day when he wakes up, he is like owned by a different country. The people of Israel and Jerusalem were taken over by the Babylonian Empire. One day they're free, the next day they are slaves. And so what we said last week was this: what do we do when culture changes? What do we do when culture shifts? How do we respond when culture changes? And the question we asked was, how do you live a godly life when culture changes? How do you live a life above reproach? How do you live a life that makes a difference, where you stand firm and you love well in a culture of compromise? How do you do this? And through this series, I've been leaning on a book written by a pastor named Chris Hodges called The Daniel Dilemma. If you don't have it yet, man, find a bookstore and find it, The Daniel Dilemma. It's an amazing book. And what we're asking is, how do we stand firm and how do we love well in a culture of compromise? Now, one of the things that I've observed as I've just kind of been reading through the book of Daniel over and over is his world changed unbelievably quickly. And what's so funny to me is it parallels so much with what's happening in our country. Our world feels like it's changing so unbelievably fast. It just does. And this isn't a political issue, this is a spiritual issue. Our country is changing. There's a research group called the Pew Research Group, and they did this study recently that said this: in the 193 nations in the world, of the 193 nations, 173 see the gospel, the message of Jesus Christ, experiencing growth faster than the rate of population growth. It simply means this: in those 173 countries, more people are entering into a relationship with Jesus and are being saved than are being born. It's just happening. It's moving faster. 173 of the 193 countries in the world. And that should be reason to applaud, except America is in one of the 20 countries that it's not happening. And when I read that, I'm just going to be honest with you and say that there's something that rises up inside of me and says that's not okay. That's not okay on our watch for there to be more people being born in our country than there are people making the decision to follow Jesus with their life. It's just not okay, and so something has to be done about it. So the question is, in a culture of compromise, in a culture of change, how can we stand firm and how can we love well? How can we stand firm and how can we love well? Now, the reality about culture is this: culture is always changing. And we're either going to allow it to change us, or we're going to be people who bring change to culture. We're either going to allow culture to change us, we're going to allow it to shape us because we're going to fold under the pressure of the way culture is changing, or we're going to be people who change culture. It's like the difference between being a thermometer and a thermostat. And there's a lot of Christians out there that are thermometers. They're really good at acting like the culture, blending in, not standing out because they don't want to ruffle any feathers, never standing up and speaking up for the needs in the world, never speaking up for injustice, never leveraging their life to make a difference. That there are many people who are a thermometer, but there are a few that are thermostats, that when they enter a room, the room changes because they're there. And I just asked this question: what would happen if all of us made the decision that, in spite of a culture that feels like it's getting increasingly dark, in spite of a culture that's changing so quickly around us, what would it look like if all of us made this decision? What would it look like if all of us made this decision to stand firm on God's word, to not let the pressure of culture change us, and to love incredibly well? Now, I am in school again, which is really like the best and the worst thing ever. I've had a lot of people say to me, congratulations on starting your doctoral program. And I'm like, yeah, you can say that to me when I graduate. Right now, give me your condolences, right? It's terrible. Like, I don't know why I signed up to get beaten up for 3 years. And I started doing a study a few weeks ago for a paper I had to write on the characteristic and the nature of heroes. Because if you study heroes, and whether it's the people who run into burning buildings that are going to collapse, or the people who run into battle, or the people who stand up for those who are oppressed, if you study through culture and through history the characteristics of heroes, there are a lot of common characteristics. Sometimes it's courage, but the truth is, sometimes the people that we ascribe the most value to because they seem so courageous aren't actually the most courageous. Sometimes the people that we ascribe courage to, we think they're the bravest, the smartest, the strongest. They seem like they're the most courageous, but the reality is they're no different than maybe you or me. They're not courageous, they are selfless. And selflessness and courage go hand in hand. You can't be courageous without being selfless. And so the common denominator between almost every hero that's ever graced the face of this earth is this sense that I have made the decision beforehand for what I am going to stand. I have made the decision that if a building is going down, if it feels like that a plane flies into a building, I'm going to leverage my life, even risk my life if necessary to save people. Why? Because at the end of the day, I have predetermined and predecided that which matters more than anything. I have made the decision prior to the decision needing to be made. This is the story of Daniel and his friends. If you weren't here last week, Daniel's life is forever changed because his country is taken over by the people of Babylon. And he has this ability to extend grace and truth, to be gracious and to show the favor and the grace of God in his relationships, but also to stand firm in that which he believes. And we're going to look today at two different stories. These two stories are from Daniel chapter 3 and Daniel chapter 6. They're two stories that are separated by about 23 years. They have two different kings under which Daniel serves. So Daniel, honestly, is serving under two completely different cultures. And in these two stories, we're going to experience a battle. And this battle is over worship. It is over what we will worship. Now, before we jump into it, one last thing is this. About 1/3 of the Bible is prophetic. Now, prophetic can mean two different things. Prophetic can mean it is prophesying or foretelling of what is to come. And prophetic also means the ability to determine right from wrong. About 1/3 of it is the Bible telling us what is to come. And I think the reason this matters is God wants to warn us, to give us a heads up for what is to come, but also it is to encourage us that we fight this fight of life not for victory, but we fight from a place of victory. We don't fight to win the battle. We fight because the battle has already been won. We know what God is going to do at the end. And so in this book, we're going to read about two different kind of prophetic moments that happen, and both of them are about worship, because what the Bible prophesies over and over and over is that Satan is at war for your heart. He is at war for your affections. He is at war for your attention, because if he can get his hands around your heart and what you worship, he can control the destiny of your life. So Daniel chapter 3 and Daniel chapter 6, we'll start with this. Daniel chapter 3 says this: King Nebuchadnezzar, this evil, wicked king, made an image of gold 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, so a 10-to-1 ratio, and he set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Now, for some context, it's hard to get your mind around this. This would have been about 90 feet tall and about 9 feet wide. King Nebuchadnezzar, this evil king, makes a statue of himself because he wants people to worship him. In some sense, he buys into the lie that he is God, and he builds this statue, and it's hard to get your mind around. So for some context, the Lincoln Memorial, it's around 99 feet tall, so just a little bit shorter than the Lincoln Memorial, gives you some context. And the aspect ratio was 10-to-1, 90 feet to 9 feet wide. It's the same aspect ratio, though it's not the same height as the Washington Monument. So he builds this big statue that has these same dimensions. It's a little bit shorter than the Lincoln Memorial, and it's an image of gold, and it's a picture of himself because he wants people to worship him. He wants people to worship his greatness. He buys into the lie that he is somehow God. The next verse is this: He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, and magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So he wants everyone from the countryside to come to this unveiling. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. And watch this next verse. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, he says this: Nations and people of every language, everyone who's here, pay attention to this. This is what you are commanded. This is what you are commanded to do. There is going to be a time, let me prophesy to you, there's going to be a time when you are commanded to worship, for your heart to bow down at the altar of. You're going to be commanded to worship something or someone that isn't God. And the herald comes out and he says, this is what you are commanded to do. Next part. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither. Anybody know what a zither is? When you hear the zither, it's a guitar, a lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music. When you hear the band hit the first note, when you hear the drummer click in, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. This is what you are to do. This is the responsibility. When you hear the music, you are to bow down. Now, verse 6, whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. So culture comes along and changes for Daniel and his friends. And the king says, I'm building this statue, this image, this golden image of me, and you are to worship it when the music plays. And if you don't, I'm going to throw you into a furnace of fire. Now, if you grew up going to Sunday school, or if you've ever watched VeggieTales, I apologize, you've possibly seen the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego thrown into the fiery furnace, and you know this story. But what I want to point out to you before we get to that miracle part of the story is this, is Nebuchadnezzar changes culture. He says, you must worship me. And then what does he do to get people to worship him? He leverages fear. He leverages fear. In fact, you can say it like this about him. Culture's motivation for worship is always going to be fear. And sometimes it's fear of missing out. Sometimes it's fear of like, well, if you don't give in to this pressure, you're going to miss out on some joy. If you don't sleep with me before we're married, I won't love you. It's like over and over and over, culture's message is if you don't experience this, if you don't do this, if you don't worship, if you don't bow your heart before me now, you're going to miss out on something spectacular later. Culture will always try to motivate you to worship by fear. Now 23 years pass from the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego bowing before the golden statue of the king. 23 years. And in the 23 years, a new king comes. His name is Darius. King Nebuchadnezzar, who we just read about, was an evil, wicked, unjust king. But for some reason, he liked Daniel. There was something about him. It's like Daniel was able to model grace and truth. He was able to stand firm and to show love in his culture. King Darius comes along, and Darius is an entirely different king. He's a good king. And he's loved by the people of Babylon. He's loved by them. And Daniel finds favor in King Darius' eyes as well. And so there are these people, these men that see Daniel, a slave, rise up to power in the kingdom. And when they see him rise up to power, they get jealous. They think, well, this isn't fair. I've gone to all the school. I have all the education. I have the right lineage, the right family to do this. And as a result, I should be promoted. But Daniel kept getting promoted higher and higher above them. So they tried to find a way to get Daniel in trouble. Daniel chapter 6 says this. Finally, these men, those who were trying to trap Daniel, said, we will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel. Now, how amazing would it be if that could be said about you? How amazing would it be? People are trying to trap you. They're trying to jack up your life and ruin your life. Like this is the reason I'll never, ever be alone with a woman who's not my wife. Ever. Ever. Why? Because it doesn't take an affair to ruin my life. It takes an allegation to ruin my life. So what did I do? On the front end of that, I just made the decision, I'll never be alone with a woman who's not my wife. Can I tell you a quick true story? When we were in Honduras, on the last day that we were in Honduras, we went from the city where we were serving into the city that's like the big city. It's called San Pedro Sula. We stayed at this hotel, and downstairs there was a club, and the club had some music just bumping, and so I had to keep pulling our team out. I'm like, guys, come on, it's embarrassing. It's a missions trip. That's not true. And anyways, so the elevators in this hotel, it's hard to explain. They had 2 elevators, and they had a maximum of 5 people. And people in Honduras they're just way small compared to Americans. The elevators are so small that I could literally like touch a wall and touch a wall. Like you just cram in to get in an elevator. So I get in the elevator with my son Joey, and instead of going down like it should have, the elevator went up. And when the elevator went up, the doors open, and this girl who looks like she's dressed for the club, or if I'm honest, doesn't really look dressed at all, she starts to step on to the elevator, and she was on the phone. And when she started to step on the elevator, I had this moment of, I can't let this be true. And so I literally grabbed Joey's hand, and as she started stepping on, we started stepping off. And as I started stepping off, she took her phone and just went back, and then the door shut, and we went down. Well, why does that matter? Because I won't even allow there to be an accusation against my character. It matters so unbelievably much. These men are looking at Daniel, trying to find a reason to accuse him. They're trying to find a reason to bring him down, but they can't find any charges against this man. So they say, unless it has something to do with the laws of his God. Like the only thing we can find wrong with him, or the only thing we'll ever be able to accuse him of, is loving his God too much. Like how amazing would it be if that was said of us? It goes on to say this. So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king, and they said to him, may King Darius live forever. Like they just started buttering him up. They just get him all excited about himself. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or any human being during the next 30 days except you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Let me keep reading and I'll come back to it. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed. So these men, they go to the king, they go to Darius, and they say to him, you're amazing. Like, you're not just like a king, you're like a god in our eyes. And how cool would it be if for 30 days the whole country acknowledged it? This isn't your idea because you're humble about it, but we think that you should have a law passed that says for 30 days, the whole country can't worship any other god except for you. That there's going to be pressure to, but they can't. For 30 days, it's a law. And they butter the king up, and the king signs off on it. Everyone has to worship him. Now, pay attention to the two different messages in the two different stories. In the first story, in story number 1, it's this. You have to pray to this God. You have to pray to the idol, the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar is building. But in story number 2, it's not you have to pray. You cannot pray in story number 2 to your God. And both of these are ways the enemy wants to use, things the enemy wants to use to stop us from worshiping our God. What does this even mean, and how does this even make sense? Like, this is what his intention is. Because Satan, if I'm just honest with you, is in a battle for your worship. His desire is for you to turn your focus, your heart, your energy away from God. Why? Because if you worship anything other than God, it will always disappoint you, it will always leave you broken, and it will always leave you longing for more. In fact, I'll say it to you like this. The only thing that will ever fully, once and forever, satisfy the cravings of your soul is the undescribable, beautiful love of God. And if you spend your whole life chasing after things to fill the void in your heart, you will always worship and bow at the altar of whatever is immediate, and you'll never experience the beauty of the ultimate, which is the love of God. You just never will. And so Satan's desire is to get you to worship. There's a battle for worship. And if we had time, we could trace back the reason. Scholars believe that between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1 verse 2, there's this falling out between Satan and God. It is talked about in the book of Ezekiel and in the book of Isaiah. You see, Satan was the first worship leader. He went by Lucifer. He was the first worship leader, but he got his heart twisted, and he started wanting to experience the worship for himself. That didn't sit right with God, so what did God do? God banished him. He kicked him out. And since then, since really the beginning of creation, Satan has been at war for the focus or the worship from our heart. Let me show it to you like this. There's two things that I think Satan wants to do to all of us. There's these two ideas that Satan wants us all to experience. The first one is this. He wants us to exalt man above God. He wants us to exalt man above God. So if we were to go back to the first story, King Nebuchadnezzar builds the statue. He builds it. And he says, I want everyone to worship me. I want everyone to worship me. Here's where the story goes, back to Daniel 3. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. I would love to offer you a thought. You never have to defend the things you love. You celebrate them and you invite others to celebrate with you. Can I offer you a loving, gentle, pastoral piece of advice? Facebook and Twitter never changed anyone's heart. Ever, ever. So your retweets, your presidential bashing, whether it's Trump or Obama or whoever it's been in the past, it doesn't do anything to move the needle in someone's heart closer to God. It just doesn't. What does? What does? It's the life that you live. It's leveraging the power of your voice for something that really matters. Verse 17, if we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. Like we're not scared. We're not going to allow fear to cause us to worship something other than our God. So if the world comes crashing in on us and we get thrown into the blazing furnace, fine. If we are thrown into the furnace, it's fine. He will deliver us from your majesty's hand. We're not worried because God will have us in this fight. Keep going. But I love the moxie. Listen to the resolve here. But even if he doesn't, even if God doesn't step in, even if he doesn't intervene, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods. We won't do it. We are not going to bow to the pressure of culture. We're not going to bow. We're not going to worship the image of gold that you have set up. We are not. You know the rest of the story. They're thrown into the fiery furnace, and what happens? God intervenes and saves them, and as a result, what happens? The needle on the whole country begins to turn back towards God. Like all of a sudden, because 3 men had the courage to stand firm and to love well, to stand up against a culture of compromise, what happens? God intervenes and changes the whole country. Keep going, okay? Daniel chapter 6, we're going to get to in a moment. So Satan wants us to exalt man above God. The second thing Satan wants is he wants us to stop the worship of God. His desire is that we would no longer worship God. Why? So we'll turn our hearts and attention towards him. Here's what it says in Daniel chapter 6, the rest of the story. Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, so now he knows he can't pray, he can't worship God anymore. Look what he does. He goes to his home upstairs, and goes to the upstairs room where the windows open towards Jerusalem. It's like, you can't pray anymore. For 30 days, you can only worship the one true God. So what does he do? He just goes upstairs into his house, and he bends down, begins to pray, and 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God just as he had done before. Whoa. But there was a decree. And the decree said that as a result of this decree that can't be repealed and can't be changed, you can only pray to King Darius. And he's like, that's fine, but I'm not going to compromise myself. You can either bow to culture, you can change culture. So Daniel's like, I choose the latter. I'm just going to change culture as a result. And he goes and he prays just like he had before. And the men who were out to get him, it says, these men, those who were watching him like a hawk, went as a group and found Daniel praying, asking God for help. And it says this, so they went to the king. They had been tricking him the whole time. And they spoke to him about his royal decree. And I just imagine Darius's heart sunk into his chest. They went to him and they said, did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any God or human being except to you, next verse, your majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den? And the king with a heavy heart said, yeah, the decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. Which means I signed the law. The punishment stands. I hate that this is the law, but it is the law. So Daniel, you have to be thrown into the lion's den. If you know the rest of the story, Darius doesn't even sleep that night. He is so worried. He's so consumed with Daniel. Like, what's going to happen to Daniel? What's going to happen to him? That at daybreak the next day, he runs to the den of lions and he looks down and Daniel's alive and well. Why? Because when you stand up for God, God has this way of standing up for you. But when you have the courage to stand up against the stream of culture that's always trying to knock you down and you stand up for the one true God, guess who has your back? God. It's amazing what God does. And so God delivers him. Darius, in his rage, takes all the men who had tricked him into signing the law and throws them into the lion's den, and the lions just go to work. They just do their thing. You know what I'm saying? God has this way. When we have the courage to stand firm and to love well, he has this way of standing up and having our backs. Culture will always be at war for your worship. It just will. And whether it is to try to trick you into exalting man above God, in fact, if you read the prophecies all the way starting around the book of Isaiah, all the way through the end of the Bible, many of the prophecies talk about the Antichrist and how one of the things the Antichrist will try to get us to do is he will leverage fear to get us to stop worshiping our gods, and he'll cause us to, in fear, have to worship him. So what does Satan want to do? He wants to get us to express love and worship, to exalt man above God. And secondly, he'll do anything he can to get you to stop worshiping our God, the one true God. Why? Because if he can get your worship, he can get your attention, he will distract you from the plan and purpose of God in your life. That is his great work. The Bible says, John 10:10, the thief, Satan, comes to steal, kill, and destroy. His intention, his stated purpose is to cause you to miss out on the life that God has for you. Okay, so here's the last question that we're going to wrestle with. Okay, so what? So what do we do about this? Like how do we not bow to the pressure? How do we not bow to fear? How do we stand firm and love well in a culture of compromise? What do we do in these circumstances? And I want to submit this simple idea to you. Here is how, as we look at Jesus' example. In the book of Mark, here's what Jesus says. Jesus is confronted by these really smart guys, and they say, what is the most important commandment? And he says, love the Lord your God with all of your heart, 4 things, your heart and your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. This is God's intention, is that we love him with these areas of our life, that we get practical and intentional about loving God the way that he longs to be loved. And so here's what it looks like. He starts with your heart and your soul. You could say it like this: our heart and our soul, those are the places of our affection. You could ask the question about yourself, where does all of your emotion go? Where do you expend all of your emotional energy? Where does it go? The question I want you to wrestle with this is, what do I love the most? What are the things that you love the most? In fact, if you were to examine your heart, can I get rough for a second? If you were to examine your bank account, what does your bank account show that you love the most? You see, God's intention is that we love him the most. Can I give you a crazy example? I am the biggest sports fan I know. If there's a way to compete, I'm competing. My problem is I've got 2 boys that are 10 and 7, and I've taught them that everything can be a game, and I've taught them that there are winners and losers in life, and we compete about everything. A couple nights ago, my son Gavin had a balloon, a helium balloon that had some of the helium had let out, and it had a weight on it, and he was just throwing it and trying to get it to land in a shoe, and it turned into this stupid game. For 30 minutes, I needed to write a paper for my doctoral degree, but there are some things in life that matter more than education. Can I hear a good amen from all the competitive people, right? Like everything's a game, and I love sports. And I'll tell you what I love. I love football, and I love NFL. I love college football. I love any football game. If it's on, I'm watching it, right? And I love the idiot fans. Can we just be honest? I love the fans that it is snowing outside and they're not wearing a shirt. Their whole body is painted. They're wearing glasses and a wig, looking stupid out there. You know what I'm saying? Just freezing their tail off as a fan, right? And we watch that on TV and we say, that is awesome. It's normal. And then we come to church and we sing these songs of worship to the God who created us. The God who longs for our affection and longs for our worship. And we stand like this. Someone in the band sings a wrong note. The words don't change fast enough on the screen. What do? Saturday, Sunday afternoon football, we're losing our ever-loving minds. Sunday, get in the car. I didn't like the songs today. Worship, music. It was never intended to be mass karaoke. It was always intended to be the portal that unlocks our heart and connects us to God on a profoundly spiritual level. It's supposed to be beautiful. So my question back to you is this. What do you love the most? For some of you, it's lust. It is. Like your whole life is about gratifying yourself. And so you work really, really hard at finding people to meet your physical needs. You will compromise the condition of your soul to get some. Like you'll do whatever it takes to meet your needs and to make yourself happy. For others of us, it is status. And so we'll put ourselves into stupid debt to appear that we're further along than we are. Like what is the thing you love the most? And is it competing with God? The second thing, Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul. The second is your mind. And I love this one because our mind is our attention. It's the things we pay attention to. It's the things that fill our brain when we have downtime. The question to wrestle with is this. What do I think about the most? What is it I think about the most? And there's nothing wrong with loving a sports team. I'm not condemning that. There's nothing wrong with having our head filled with work and things to do. But if it gets in the place where it crowds out thinking about the love, the unconditional grace, the indescribable love of Jesus, when it gets to that point of crowding all of it out so there's never room for God, it's become the thing you worship. Like when we hear stories like the first one we read about the 90-foot golden statue, don't you a little bit go like, that's cool, but that would never happen in our world. Right. But all kinds of things compete for our attention. All kinds of things compete for our heart. All kinds of TV shows, entertainment, movies, all of those things are always at war for space in your mind. Why does it matter? Because what I think about the most reflects the thing that matters to me most. And Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and with all your mind. And then the last one is with your strength. And our strength is simply this, it's our abilities. It's the energy we have. It's what God's given us. And the question I want you to wrestle with is this. What do I do the most? What is the thing that I just do the most? And for many of us, if we're just candid about this last one, what do? Well, I wake up in the morning just in time to brush my teeth, grab a shower, grab something on the way out the door, go eke my way through 8 or 9 or 10 hours of work, come home, sit down, grab some dinner, watch a little TV, go to bed, wake up the next day, do it over and over and over again. And we don't invest our lives in something eternal. We don't invest our lives in something that matters. We don't give the best of us to helping someone know, find, and follow Jesus. In fact, let me say it to you like this. This is the reason that I'm begging you next Sunday. If you haven't gone through our Next Steps class, I'm begging you to go because we're all about helping you discover the giftings and talents that God has given you. so that you can unleash them on the world, so that you can use them through the local church to make a difference. We have it next Sunday here right after our 11 o'clock service, so right around 12:30. In Brandon, it'll be next Sunday at 3 o'clock there at the Y. We would love for you to come. Why? Because we want you to use your heart and your soul to love God, to show him your affection. We want you to use your mind to create space to just think about and to process his unfathomable love. We want you to use your abilities to make a difference in someone else's life. What would it look like if all of us made this decision with our life to not be held captive to fear? To not feel like we have to worship something or someone, some object, some relationship, some social status, some sexual desire. What would it look like if we stopped, we laid all of that down, we turned our attention and focus, our heart, our soul, our mind, and our strength? Say, God, I'll tell you what I think would happen. As I think that you would have the courage to stand firm in love well. I said earlier that the common denominator, the common characteristic of people who are heroes, that exhibit unbelievable courage, is selflessness. That maybe you and I need to make the decision to lay down our selfish desires and to pick up the desire to worship God with everything that we have. What happens in those moments is I believe you and I get to live the heroic kind of moments. We get to experience the miracles of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pray for you now. I'm going to ask you all across this room with me. Would you bow your head and close your eyes? I'm going to pray for you. Lord, we love you. We want to have the courage of people like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to make the decision on the front end of who or what we are going to worship with our lives. And we choose you. God, forgive us for those of us who haven't loved you with our heart and soul, which is our affection. God, forgive those of us who haven't loved you with all of our mind, which means we've just never created space for you. Forgive those of us who haven't loved you with our strength. We haven't shown you our love with the things that we do. God, may this church be the rowdiest, craziest church because we're so in love with you. May this church be the kind of church that when we worship selflessly. We worship you with full, reckless abandon because of what you've done for us. We love you, God, and we thank you for it.